I was 11 when Iron Man came out, so I was probably a bit too young to get really interested in the soon-to-become blockbuster smashes, but when I grew up a little, reached that magical age threshold of 14, and finally got into movies for good, I still wasn't the biggest fan. I have to admit, I was a bit of a film snob, starting my film buff career by watching PTA's The Master, Michał Haneke's Amour, or ambitious Polish cinema. Therefore, I thought of Marvel films as heartless cash grabs, offering only the CGI spectacle. However, a little bit later, thanks to my lovely girlfriend, I started to appreciate the MCU. I found some non-blockbuster artistic quality in it, as well as was impressed by its brave choices on some occasions. And that is why I'd like to happily welcome you to my brand new subjective top 10 list, in which we'll go down my top 10 favorite MCU movies. I think it may be an interesting experiment, because I'm no comic book reader, so my opinion is solely based on the perspective of a random cinema lover. Also, please remember it's a wholly subjective list, so don't take it as a serious objective ranking, and simply have fun along the way. First off, some honorable mentions. Doctor Strange, 2016, directed by Scott Derrickson. If you don't have too high hopes, Benedict Cumberbatch's superhero origin story is really fun. Add some impressive visual effects, Matt Mikkelsen as the bad guy, and the typical Marvel humor, and you get a friendly adventure that manages to stick out a little different than all the rest of Marvel origin stories. Avengers Endgame, 2019, directed by Anthony and Joe Russos. I get a feeling that this flick has as much worshippers as enemies. My thoughts on it are a whole different story, possibly for a separate video essay, but I cannot overlook the size of a historic achievement this beast of a movie is. Tying together so many characters and their movies is huge, and the first ever, and we were alive to experience it. Wow. Spider-Man: Homecoming, 2017, directed by Jon Watts. I feel pretty bad about leaving the first Spidey movie out of the top 10, yet if it took a bit bolder chances in terms of its artistic aspect, it would have benefited a lot. Nevertheless, Tom Holland rocks as Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and his first solo adventure delivers all the laughs, dreads, chills and feels. Number 10. Ant-Man, 2015, directed by Peyton Reed. On one hand, if it was actually Edgar Wright who directed the thing, it would be hailed as a masterpiece. But even with a more regular director, Ant-Man stole my heart mostly for its imaginative use of the premise and, respectively, the humor. The climax on the train, and Paul Rudd is probably the best fit for the character they could have ever found. Number 9. Black Panther, 2018, directed by Ryan Coogler. I know what are the implications of white dudes not entirely praising Ryan Coogler's Black Panther. The biggest asset of this movie is definitely its groundbreaking. As for Marvel, visual trajectory it aims for, plus the stellar, talented cast. However, I'm always a little bit lost when most of people on YouTube claim that Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger is the best villain of the entire franchise. Additionally, I'm not 100% sold on some of the CGI stuff in this movie. Nevertheless, I still understand how important a work of art it is, and I honestly admire it because of that. Number 8. Iron Man, 2008. Directed by Jon Favreau. The world of cinema would be certainly different if it wasn't for this movie, wouldn't it? Jon Favreau's 2008 Iron Man is a consciously and cunningly designed flick, which perfectly understands what it takes to be an ideal blockbuster. Not to mention that it established the figure of Robert Downey Jr., who, again, if it wasn't for this movie, would definitely not be one of the most easily recognized names and faces on the planet today. Number 7. The Avengers, 2012. directed by Joss Whedon. That was the MCU film that finally convinced the younger movie snob version of me to openly dig the MCU as a whole. Not only does it prove director Joss Whedon's undeniable talent for guiding his characters, but also how big of a cultural event the Marvel Renaissance was. Just type Avengers in your Google browser, you'll see what I'm talking about. Number 6. Avengers: Age of Ultron. 2015, directed by Joss Whedon. Hold your murderous horses for a sec, all Age of Ultron haters please. Let me explain why the sequel to the Avengers is on a higher place than its predecessor on this list. First of all, to me, if a movie sequel is done well, I instantly prefer it to the first installment. I like it when the character arcs are built on and improved. I like to go back to the characters I like. And I also like how brilliantly Whedon flips all of the hardcore fans' expectations when it comes to Ultron himself and etc. Overall, I consider Age of Ultron to be incredibly interesting in themes, even if its dramatic stakes weren't always handled as they should have been. Number 5. Avengers: Infinity War. 2018, directed by Anthony and Joe Russos. 3 Avengers films in a row, huh? Infinity War is a hell of a movie. Intense, thrilling and ambitious. Especially when it comes to how brilliantly it handles the character of Thanos. It's probably the closest to my perfect superhero flicks I'd like to watch on Sunday afternoons. But my biggest issue with it is its, let's call it, level of the MCU connectedness. What I'm trying to say is that if you're not up to date with all the previous entries, you are practically left behind as an audience member. That's quite a drawback for me, yet it still can't overshadow the sheer epic scale of this insane film. Number 4. Guardians of the Galaxy. 2014, directed by James Gunn. I remember that the opening scene of Guardians of the Galaxy had me thinking, this is going to be a wild ride. And guess what? It was. From the memorable cast of characters, great humor,
the high-end community it's a tight-knit. The high-end community is a very tight-knit. I cannot possibly betray the confidentiality of...
and a really original approach, James Gunn's MCU debut is as good as it gets. And above all, I could count Marvel movies that actually moved me on the fingers of one hand, and Guardians was the first one of those to pull it off on me. Number 3. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. 2017, directed by James Gunn. It may still surprise you, but I've already said it, I have a soft spot for some good old sequels, and the sequel to the insanely well done Guardians of the Galaxy delivers at every aspect. The characters are smartly developed, the world building is sneaky yet not overwhelming, and the main plotline with Peter Quill's father, portrayed by the great Kurt Russell.
Excuse me. Gotta take a whiz.
Is familiar in the best way possible. And don't forget the next best MCU opening scene. Number 2. Captain America: Civil War, 2016, directed by Anthony and Joe Russos. The trailer for this film was the first ever to get me really excited for an upcoming Marvel flick. The debut of Peter Holland's Spider-Man, all of the superheroes we know facing each other in a philosophical duel, the seemingly high stakes necessary for an epic cinematic adventure. Although, despite all of that, my personal favorites are the unforgettably humane villain and the painful, realistic and brutal final fight between Tony, Cap and Bucky. Whew, still feeling damn shivers, man. With my top 10 rankings, I always try to keep you hooked until the grand reveal of the final name, title or anything else, but this time I cannot hold myself, for I want to talk about it so hard. So here it goes. Number 1. Thor Ragnarok, 2017, directed by Taika Waititi. Straight away, without any hesitation, I can call this movie a masterpiece.
I'm particularly fond of these. I pulled them out of a place on Midgard called Texas. I even named them Des and Troy.
And I am not the kind of person who calls every other movie a masterpiece. Heck, I don't even call every 10th or 20th movie I watch a masterpiece. But this is different. Director Taika Waititi struck gold with his spin on Thor. The film is full of his signature style, of his masterful sense of humor.
That's what.
And some truly breathtaking visuals. The decision to let the actors improvise here and there was spot on. It turned out to be surprising, engaging and super positively charged to the core. To say that Thor Ragnarok is the best reinterpretation of a well-known MCU character is an understatement. The huge gamble that this film had to look like on paper paid off big time. If every single Marvel film was so brave in its original vision, the MCU would easily make its way onto each and every film class out there. It is still quite hard to predict whether the MCU is going to maintain its position as the unquestionable leader of the world's blockbuster genre. Nevertheless, till this point, it is no doubt a firm go-to place if you're in the mood for cheeky, entertaining and exploding from all that passion of its authors piece of blockbuster burger. A worthy blockbuster trademark of our times, as divisive as they come. This is why it's important to have things that can connect us, not divide us. And everyone out there, no matter if they are a film snob or a regular person treating cinema as an ordinary way to spend 2 hours to spare, can find in the Marvel Cinematic Universe something only for them.
Will I die before I dance? Is this science or is it romance?
Hi, I am Kuba, and you are in my moved mind in bonus episode of Season 3, Pop Culture for you guys. I mean, I know I've said that each season is strictly 6 episodes long, but when there is something I need to add to a season as a whole, then I do it. Like in this example. Hope you enjoyed my third top 10 ranking ever, because I had a blast, both writing and putting it together afterwards. So now it is really the end of Season 3, but don't you worry, Season 4 is basically around the corner, and trust me, it's going to be so different an experience than all of the previous Moved Mind seasons altogether. I'm already stoked just thinking about it. Therefore, don't you be even a little bit sad about me saying goodbye to this season. Keep a close eye on my Facebook, Instagram or Twitter accounts or pages if you don't want to miss out on anything, and that's been an honor. See you all soon. Cześć, ja jestem Kuba, a ty jesteś w bonusowym odcinku po finale 3. sezonu Poruszonego Umysłu Popkultura. Wiem, że to może być dla ciebie nieco zaskakujące, bowiem obiecywałem przecież sezony po 6 odcinków każdy, ale gdy czuję, że trzeba coś jeszcze dodać, jakieś ostatnie słowo lub kropkę nad i, wtedy dzieje się coś takiego jak to. Dziękuję zatem za dołączenie do mnie w mojej trzeciej już subiektywnej liście top 10. To już naprawdę koniec sezonu trzeciego, ale nie martw się. Sezon 4 jest już tuż za rogiem i jedyne co mogę zdradzić to fakt, że będzie to doświadczenie zgoła inne od wszystkiego, co do tej pory widziałeś lub widziałaś w poruszonym umyśle. Dlatego polecam trzymać rękę na pulsie na moich stronach na Facebooku, Instagramie czy Twitterze, by żadna nowinka ci nie uciekła i do zobaczenia niebawem. Nie możecie tam zabraknąć.